All right. So, Gina, it's nice to have you on the show today.
Thank you so much for having me.
Yeah. So, where are you joining us from today?
I'm actually in South Florida, close to Miami area.
And South Florida, that's not exactly known for a lot of ghostly activity, or is it?
There's a lot of interesting beaches, haunted cemeteries, and we have a lot of really cool locations in the Florida Keys as well. I know a lot of people are familiar with Robert the Doll. He's located in Key West.
Do you believe in Robert the Doll? I always ask people this when they bring him up. Do you really think that doll's haunted?
I have a really interesting experience with Robert the Doll, so I'd love to share. And so I investigated in November of 2024, and I went down. I did the investigation on Sunday night. There was only a few attendees, and the person who was running the investigation basically said, to my surprise, "Hey, when you're investigating with Robert, just be cool, be calm, collected, but respectful. Do not ask for permission when it comes to taking pictures or videos." And I said, "Oh, that's really strange because I was always under the impression that you guys were always advertising to ask permission." And he explained that recently they had changed their policy as a museum and they were asking that people not ask permission because he said that the act of asking permission was in fact inviting negative energy to occur. So they officially changed their policy. I did not ask permission. I was respectful and I got some interesting paranormal activity. So it wasn't a ton, but I investigated around the doll for quite a bit of time while I was there. I would say maybe, about 2 hours. And towards the end of this time, I was getting a little, kind of frustrated because I wasn't getting any responses. So I sort of said, "Hey, the person I'm with doesn't believe in you, Robert. He doesn't believe you're haunted, but I think you are, buddy. I think you are pretty cool." And I got a little giggle on my portal box. So it was like a childlike giggle that came through the portal. And then as I was getting ready to leave, we were kind of walking around a little bit around the area. And I got on my Ovilus device, it said Robert. And I thought that was pretty cool. So I went back and I said bye to him. And as far as is the doll haunted, maybe. I think it's one of those situations very much like Annabelle, who's another haunted doll, where it's so overhyped at this point that it becomes so ingrained in everyone's mind as being such an intense situation that no matter what happens, you're going to think that something negative is going to happen, and you're going to take
I was going to say, I was going to say, we know, and me personally know all about that. So when we had Annabelle come to New Orleans, I ended up getting like 60, 70 death threats, like legit death threats, because that's when the plantation burned down and all that other stuff. And you might've heard that, oh, Annabelle did it, which is just absurd. But yeah, people love to attribute essentially anything spooky, I guess within 100 miles of the doll, to the doll. I'm one of those people, I'm not sure that any of these dolls are haunted, and I could be wrong because I'm a believer in ghosts, like no doubt. But there's parts of me, it's like really like the Robert the Doll thing. If you didn't ask permission, something bad would happen to you. To me, that just doesn't like really like you think that ghost has nothing better to do.
Yeah, and I also think, it becomes part of the local folklore. But now with podcasting and, the internet, we have so much more access to these stories and people, they become infamous. And I think the idea is more scary than the actual situation. And if you go in and it's the power of, your mind thinking that something bad's going to happen. So that if you leave there and something does happen to you, you're going to attribute that to the doll. And I just kind of feel like that's a little bit on the crazy side. And I also don't think that dolls have the capability of getting up and running around and doing anything nefarious. But
I mean, they will here in the future once Elon Musk has his way with them.
Yeah, that's for sure.
They'll be doing all kind of things. A lot of it not appropriate, I'm sure. Well, you mentioned this idea of, people kind of coming in with these preconceived notions or having these preconceived notions of this doll being a certain way, and therefore any experience they have reinforces that, whether or not it's actually because of the doll or not. Do you think the same thing's happening in haunted locations themselves?
I do. I do think that is absolutely a possibility. And there was an interesting experiment called the Philip experiment. Have you heard of it?
I have not.
The Philip experiment happened, it was done at a conference in Canada. I don't know the exact year off the top of my head, but the idea of the experiment was that a group of investigators was given the background on a spirit, and the spirit's name was Philip. This was all fabricated. It was made up for the experiment, but all these investigators were given background information, what Philip was like, what year they lived, and things along that line. And they started investigating, and they started gathering evidence from this ghost that was named Philip. And it was an interesting phenomenon because the idea was that these investigators believed so much so that they were interacting with the spirit that they sort of created a spirit. Now, I think that that's absolutely a possibility when it comes to certain locations. I think that that's why investigating with a variety of equipment is important. So that way, if you hear a sound and you get a spike in EMF and you get a reading on one of your motion sensor devices, if you have 3 or 4 points of evidence, it's harder to debunk. And, I would say that's a little bit more credible. But I absolutely think that some people sort of create the idea of spirits because they're so overhyped when they visit locations.
At what point was it after you began doing the paranormal investigations or before where something happened and you just knew that this was real? Because, of course we have skeptics and believers, all that kind of stuff. Were you always a believer, or was there a part of you that was that skeptic, like, oh, ghosts aren't real, and then something happened to you and that triggered all of this? Like, how did that happen for you?
I think just the more I started investigating, the more I was experiencing things that I couldn't explain. And, when it came to, having a really profound experience on a location in Savannah, I got to investigate the Sorrell-Weed house, which is a very famous haunted location. And I had a really, really profound experience in the carriage house that really kind of changed the way I looked at investigating and made me want to investigate more, made me want to duplicate what I experienced there other places. And it just sort of, for me, I really wanted to just learn more about what was happening. I wanted to learn more about equipment. I wanted to learn more about how things worked, how to debunk, how to do things more in a professional way. So that really kind of became more of the driving factor for me. And what really kind of got me interested was that location.
Well, what was that profound experience?
So the Sorrell-Weed house has been on a bunch of ghost hunting shows. It was on, I think the first time I saw it was on Ghost Adventures. And, I knew a little bit about the story, but the background was the house was originally used as a war barracks during the Revolutionary War. And then it became a mansion. They built it up and made it into a mansion. And the husband was a doctor. He was doing kind of some shady experiments, maybe in the basement. Maybe people who couldn't afford to see a doctor, they were going to him for some work. But a lot of things kind of occurred in the basement that maybe weren't so kosher. And he was having an affair with one of the enslaved people on the property. This was definitely not something that was mutual because she was an enslaved person. And his wife found out, and his wife jumped off the roof. And then shortly thereafter, the enslaved woman was also found unalived. And, it was one of those things that, it marked the property. It made it, infamous. And for years afterwards, many rumors would go about around Savannah that the place was haunted. And the owners of the property now, it's a museum, they do tours, and they also host paranormal investigations. So that's just a little bit on the background. So on this investigation, I got to explore the whole house, and then we were able to get into the carriage house, which is where the enslaved people lived. And I was just with 3 other people, and the docent, when she opened the building up and she let us in, she just said on our way out, she said, "Hey guys, when you're here, just keep it light. This was a very happy place. This was a refuge for these people. This was where they would have dinner after a hard day. This is where they would relax. They would sing. They would have their, cooking." And she said, "Please just keep it light because we like the energy here to be light." So that was great advice. And, we were investigating, and I was with my husband, who's a singer. And I said, "Hey, why don't we see if you sing a song, if we get any reaction?" Because the woman mentioned singing. They like to sing up here. So he's like looking at me, he's going, "What do I sing?" And I thought, okay, I don't know, maybe something bluesy. Maybe, he knows some Elvis songs. I said, "Why don't you sing Blue Suede Shoes?" And so he started singing Blue Suede Shoes. And almost immediately, we started getting some voices on the spirit box. There was it sounded like an older man that said, "I don't trust him." And then there was a little kid, it sounded like a younger person, said, "He's okay." And then what sounded like a female humming the tune. It was like back to back to back. And it was just so chilling. And, he stopped singing and he's looking at me and I'm looking at him and the other people in the room. And we just kind of felt this very interesting shift in the energy is the only way I could describe it. It felt like we weren't alone. And there wasn't anything afterwards. There really wasn't much before that. But it was this, as soon as he started singing, all of a sudden the activity happened and then it stopped. And it was just, we kind of felt like we made a connection. And we felt like, hey, maybe they appreciated the music. Maybe they appreciated us. And yeah, it's okay for them to not be sure about us too. We're people in their space. So it was a cool experience for all of us. And it made me want to kind of duplicate that and experiment with, that kind of thing in other places, maybe singing, maybe dancing, maybe playing music. It doesn't have to just be, is there anyone here with us? Are you a man or a woman?
Do you know that you're dead?
It's more than that. They were people. So it was a really, really profound experience for me.
If you enjoyed this clip from the Ghost City podcast, be sure to check out the full episode right here on the Ghost City Tours YouTube page. Subscribe to our channel for new spooky content every week.